And my presentation is going to be very generic in terms of trying to give everyone the context under which we started to develop changes in the way that we teach our language courses. So these are the two things that I want, or that I propose that we discuss in small groups of maybe 4 people. Consider the last 2 language textbooks you use. How did they structure the introduction of a new grammar topic? What are the pros and cons of these particular structures? We all know there's a formula most of the time to publishers in the way that they produce textbooks, and probably if you close your eyes, you can see the textbook and you can out loud tell me these are the things that are seen every time there's a new chapter, every time there's a lesson. So think about that and think about what are the pros and cons of that particular structure that you're familiar with. Now consider the current pedagogical structure of a typical lesson plan for your course. What is the usual structure of a class dedicated to presenting a new grammar topic? Traditionally, we have the book that guides us, right? So our lesson plans, if our textbook has a structure, our lesson plan has a typical structure that we follow. We often joke with each other when we've been teaching for a long time, I can do that grammar topic blindfolded, right? Because we've done it so many times and we kind of know the structure. So I'll give you maybe 3 minutes to discuss in groups of 4, or maybe 5 minutes so you have time to introduce each other, since we haven't done that yet. Maybe groups of 4 or 3, and then we'll come back together and discuss. This is the formula that we often see in the textbooks that we use. In a more sophisticated way, someone named it the presentation practice production cycle, and they trademarked it, so kudos to them for making it a nice sort of formula that we can all recognize. And so there it is, right? Verb tense chart, verb tense explanation, in-class practice, fill in the blank, gap exercises, matching, crossword puzzles, right? A song with the fill in the gap idea, a story that has the verbs missing, yeah? Matching, games, right? Where they have to memorize something and so forth. And then we assess them with the same type of exercises that are in the textbook. I think part of the idea is that publishers don't have a lot of time, right, and teachers ourselves don't have a lot of time, so these are also easy to grade. And oftentimes if we have the software, it can be automatically graded, right? And so this is a perfect way to get that done. So what I'm going to propose is let's enhance what we already have, right? So we have this formula. I've been using it for many years. Can I enhance it and improve it and complement it with new ideas? And the last 3 years, that's what I've been trying to do with my colleagues. So we parted, one of the very first things that we did actually was to try to understand the way that we receive information and the way that we learn, right? So we took it all the way back to how is it that we learn. And Kate really has guided us with issues of cognition and how do we memorize things and how do we acquire knowledge. So we had to go way, way back. And in doing so, one of the first things that we worked with was the inductive-deductive continuum, which can be a little overwhelming, and you might wonder what its use is, but it helps us situate where are we in terms of how we feel that our students best acquire knowledge, yes? And so what we're trying to propose here is that instead of going from either a deductive approach to an inductive approach, we can meet somewhere in the middle and take the best from all the different ways that we acquire knowledge. Now I gave you the continuum, and I'm going to give you concrete examples, because the first time I saw this, none of that meant anything to me until I actually had concrete, well, what does that mean in the classroom? Yes. So let's move from deduction. Well, actually, I'll give you a few minutes to see if your neighbor, if 2, 3 brains are better than 1, if you can come up with what would it look like in the classroom if I solely did a deductive approach. And you have a little bit of a clue on the bottom, right? Rules, metalinguistic awareness. So I'll give you like 2 minutes. That way we do an inductive approach. I don't just give you the answer. So I'm going to give you my humble little list of concrete examples of where each of these categories fits in the language classroom. So we got deductive. You give them the rule, you have them practice. We can debate on whether you give them the rule in English or you give them the rule in the target language. That's not something that we're we're trying to argue about. It's just sort of the definition of deductive. When we're talking about explicit metalinguistic awareness, that means that you don't, if we think about the extreme where there's not really any rules talked about and you just speak the language, when you ask a student to be metalinguistically aware, you're asking them to be conscious of the fact that language is a thing that you can study. It's not just something that you speak. It's not just something that comes to you. It is an actual object of study. And I think that's one of the things that really, for me, when I started, to do all this reading and learning, was that they see that in OChem, in engineering, in biology. The human body is an object of study, right? Architecture, buildings. But language, oh, it's fun. And I had a student tell me, I needed a break during my day. So I signed up for your class. I was like, is that a compliment? Or I was not, right? And so the idea, right, that we can approach language as an object of study sort of really brings this seriousness and conveys to students, right, that it is an object of study, just like chemistry would be, just like physics would be, et cetera. And I think for me that was one of the more powerful realizations that, this is an object of study, yeah? And you make them meta-linguistically aware that that is what's going on. Yeah. So input, enhancement, and structured data, they're very much closely related. You bring data to the classroom and you either simply enhance it, like what I was saying, put it in bold, underline, put italics on the things that you want them to notice. Or you can just bring a bunch of data that's manipulated and structured. Nothing is enhanced. I think you were saying, do you enhance anything or you just show them? You enhance and then you show them more than one. So you're combining both. And you show them a bunch of structured data that's not necessarily enhanced, hoping for them to draw out what the pattern is or what the thing is that you're trying to get them to notice is. And what we're doing here at the center is moving throughout the continuum based on the thing that we're going to teach. So we're not trying to say, well, everything that you ever teach needs to be right in the middle with explicit input enhancement. What we're trying to do is develop a process by which we think about the topic that we're going to bring to class and we think about which space within this continuum is the most appropriate for that particular topic. Whereas our textbook oftentimes doesn't give us that space, right? Because they've already told us where they are in the continuum, right? And so yes, that implies a lot of work on our part because we really have to think about, well, what is this topic? Where does it best fit? Maybe try with more than one method from the continuum until we find one that we find to be the most effective. So how do we interpret the enhancement of the communicative approach? What I was just saying, exploring the deductive inductive continuum. And we have a very particular sort of list of features that here at the center we have sort of come up with during our exploration of the continuum and during our attempt to enhance our communicative approach. So we use authentic language data, and my colleague Aymara will later guide you to, well, how do I get my hands on authentic material, particularly in a less commonly taught language. I always carry that. I know that I teach Spanish. Houston has a lot of Spanish speakers. I get that. But just because you teach a less commonly taught language doesn't mean that there aren't creative ways to get your hands on authentic language data. And so Aymara will explain to you what we mean by that and how you can obtain that. We work with enhanced input, not overly structured, right? Because we don't want to frustrate students, right? So like, here's 50 examples. How come you can't understand the rule, right? So we work somewhere in the middle where we have, I can't give you a magic number, but we give them a series of examples. We try to enhance it when we think that the enhancement is necessary through boldface type, et cetera. And we try to give them a healthy amount for them to try to get to conclusions that we're trying to get them to get to. We use language analysis, meaning what I was saying earlier, language is an object that you can study and you can analyze. We want them to become aware of this. That's language awareness. And these are words you'll hear throughout the day. And it's very much student-centered, which was also, it's also a way that we've described many of the approaches that have been used throughout the years as student-centered. We're still very much student-centered, right? The students are the ones that sort of guide the conversation and the class. So we'll get to the lesson plan that is actually on our website, and we can have this initial exploration of our website. So this is what I did for third year Spanish. So the way that a lot of Spanish grammar courses work, first year, they learn every single grammar topic that ever existed. And then second year, they regurgitate some of the more difficult ones. And then third year, they do third year grammar courses, intense grammar. They go into very sort of nuanced ideas about grammar. So my selection of authentic material was a series of conversations between study abroad students and host families. I took my students to Spain. I asked them to speak with their host parent and to ask them about their favorite trip of all time, in the past, knowing that the reference point was the past, right? Tell me about a trip that you took that was your favorite. That's it. They had no idea. The family actually thought they were being interviewed for cultural purposes, which was great because I didn't want them to be aware of how they were speaking or to change anything. But if you don't have access to that, although those files are on our website and public, I've also made use of people on YouTube speaking. I've asked family members. They think that I'm doing like cultural studies, but I'm recording them for linguistic purposes. I've actually asked family members to give me screenshots of text messages that we have, or they have, because I don't include my own data, with each other in the target language, emails, etc. And then I'll guide you through number 2, which is the type of questions that you ask students in order to get them to where you want them to go. So I give them the data. In order to give them a little bit of that practice with the conjugation and the verb tense, I have them listen to it and fill in the blank, just because it's comfortable, and so we can get them thinking about the verb conjugations. I have a very specific series of questions that I ask them in order to analyze the data that we are looking at. And then we get a second set of language data for confirmation of the conclusion. Yeah. So not only are they looking at the data that I provide to them, I ask them to go get some more data from somewhere else to confirm or to question the conclusions that we came to. I should be done by now. That we came to in class. And then I asked them to produce a similar task as presented in the authentic data. So if they're listening to the audio of storytelling, they've analyzed the data, they've done some analysis at home, and then I'm asking them to narrate their favorite trip as well. Yes? Okay, so let's take a look at the actual lesson. I think this will work. So this is our website. We break it down almost like an actual lesson, like if you were a student going through a lesson. We have parsed out all the different steps of the lesson plan. If you just want to skip ahead and get the actual lesson plan instead of having to go through the video and watching me and my students do what we do in the classroom, you can. It's almost like when you do HR training, you have to click and you can't skip through this menu. We force you to at least look at the screenshot of me and my students, yeah? So actually it might just be easiest, well, we can do it this way. Okay, so because these are third year students, the first thing I did was ask them, if you were an instructor of Spanish, what 2 rules would you give a fresquito, a freshman, in order for them to start thinking about narrating in the past? And I only said 2 because I knew they were gonna give me the 2 verb tenses that we have in Spanish that are presented to them in most textbooks as the 2 verb tenses that are used to narrate in the past, right? So it worked out great. When they came and filmed, the students gave me those answers. I would say that you need the preterite and you need the imperfect to narrate in the past, and you need to know how to conjugate those, right? So I asked them to bring me sort of their foundational knowledge of what they thought narrating in the past meant, setting them up to trick them, yes. Okay, so I asked them to do that in pairs and groups. Then we come back together as a class and I, on the board, summarize it. I would change that to make it more student-centered. I would ask for a student to come summarize for the class. And then they listen to the actual audio. And here you have access to the audio of the interviews in Spanish, the transcription, the translation, and the manipulated data that has the blanks that I wanted them to fill. I mean, we have this in most, not most, but in a lot of different languages, so you can explore our website. So this is the part where they felt good because they were listening, filling in with verbs, and taking a look at the data for the first time. Yeah, this is the first time they're seeing the data. Then I always have them share in groups, confirm their blanks, etc. So we're building them up to the most important part. We listen to it twice. which is the language analysis part. And because they're third-year students, we're able to do all this in the target language. Now, a question that might be in the back of your mind is, well, I teach first-year students, how do we do language analysis? I think that the expert is Kevin, who does this type of work. Not behind you, Kevin, you, Kevin, who does this type of work in first year. But I'll repeat what I said earlier. It is taking the question and simplifying it for a first-year student. So all students in first year know the words for yes and no in Spanish, right? Or in the target language. So you give them a little basic chart and you ask them yes and no questions about the language that you're asking them to analyze. It sounds simple, but Kevin will show you all the work that he does in order to include language analysis at a first year level. So they're analyzing the language. I think I have here, or it might be in your handout. No, they're not there. In your handout, you will see the actual questions that I asked students. I translated them for you guys into English. So in this case, because students already have knowledge about conjugation, they already have knowledge about the two preferred verb tenses for conjugating in the past, they come with a whole bag of knowledge. What I'm asking them to notice is actually the disruption in those pure grammar rules that they've been learning. So this is really sort of a mind-blowing moment in their lives, because when they hear native speakers manipulate language in a way that they're incapable of manipulating because they don't have those tools yet, they're in shock. They're like, Profe, how do these people not use the preterite and the imperfect? You know, why are they not in this sort of purest way of language being presented in the textbook? Because if I think about the textbook that I use to introduce preterite and imperfect, the dialogues and the conversations in there are so beautiful. Complete sentences, no noise in the background, no crutches, no in the middle or rephrasing. They're beautiful conversations. And when you give them this data for the first time and they hear the background noise, the repeating something, the unfinished sentences, there's a point in which the question is asked in a certain verb tense, but it's responded to with another. And they were taught you respond with whatever verb tense you were asked. You know, it's at this level, it's pretty exciting for them to see the language in this way. So the questions that you see on there are asking them, you know, what verb tenses did you actually hear the speakers use? And which of these verb tenses that you heard were surprising to you and why? And also, why did they think, or if they could speculate as to why the native speaker chose to use a different verb tense other than the two holy grail verb tenses that are presented as the ones used to narrate in the past, yeah? And so because they're third year, we were able to have these conversations about what is going on with native speakers. And I made sure that the samples included native speakers that were purists, right, that sort of fit the box, some that didn't, some that use, in Spanish, we often use the present tense as a way to narrate about the past in order to bring the story closer to that moment. And so we talked about that sort of nuanced idea. Generally speaking, a third year Spanish textbook, if we want to look into that nuanced topic, we'll have a chapter and we'll say a lot of Spanish speakers use the present tense to refer to events that happened in the past. I could have done that. It would have saved me 50 minutes. I would have come into class and say, you can use the present to talk about the past. But in this way, it was much more enriching. We sort of went through a journey together. It wasn't just me telling them that this thing existed. It wasn't just a textbook telling them that this thing existed. It was an actual, authentic recording. We were also able to talk a little bit about regional accents and the way that people in Seville pronounce things, which is much different than Madrid and other countries. So the key was making sure that I developed questions that were guiding them towards the things I wanted them to think about. In my case, I really work a lot with verb tense because my third year course happens to be very heavy on looking into the nuances of verb tenses for the Spanish students. But my colleagues that will present later and after me will talk to you about other topics that you can do in this way and for different levels of instruction from first year to second year, et cetera. So conclusions, we should be right on time, I hope. So we're trying to enhance what we already do, and in my particular case, that is what I have been doing. I took the communicative approach training that I had, and I am now enhancing it and exploring other parts of the deductive-inductive continuum. I have explored what is the guided induction approach through the use of authentic data. It really asks students to do a lot of analytical and critical thinking. And you can compare that to if I'm just at home reading a rule and then I come to class to practice. When I send them home with language analysis homework in the third year in Spanish, I had a student in one of my evals say, I worked harder for this class than for OChem, and I still got the same grade. And I was like, yes, because the formula, I changed the formula on you, right? They thought they knew, particularly in the case of Spanish, which is a language that's seen as easy, right? If we think about the hierarchy of languages, right? Spanish, like, oh, everyone can speak Spanish, it's so easy. So that has been great to sort of insert that analytical, critical thinking ideas. The things that I'm struggling with, or the things that we're all as a center trying to refine and we're working on, is how to modify these methods for first year. And like I said, Kevin is someone who has, and he's actually worked with Elade a lot to figure out how to do this for first year. Investment of time, right? Because we all don't have a whole lot of time. I think what happens is that it gets easier with time. So once you've done it once or twice, you kind of get the idea and it becomes easier. And if you recycle the authentic materials that you have, that also saves you a lot of time. You need a database of authentic data, and Aymara will show you how to find, she'll give you the answer on how to find authentic data. And making sure, I think one of the tendencies, and I think Rafael was trying to make this point too, the tendencies from the things that I've been sort of reading and thinking about, the tendencies have been to move between extremes, right? So either I'm just going to drop them in the classroom and we're going to speak the target language with no sort of direction and just let it happen, or we're going to go back to like old school with a ruler in your hand, repeat after me, and let's conjugate, and right? And so the tendency has been to move within these two extremes, and what has been refreshing for me is to say, well, where in the middle, right, can we meet and draw the best from all those methods, right? Because if we're all speakers of various languages and we all learned probably with one of these methods, that means that there's something great about all of them, right? And for me, the benefit has been taking the best and having a good balance in my classroom. Yeah, so I just thank you for your time and your patience and your participation.